In the 13th century, a storm of horsemen erupted from the steppes of Mongolia and basically consumed the known world. They carved out the largest contiguous land empire in human history, a dominion stretching from the shores of the Pacific to the gates of Vienna. But this empire wasn't built on handshakes and trade deals. It was built on a mountain of skulls. A single empire, forged by one man and his descendants, was responsible for a wave of death and destruction that, according to some traditional estimates, may have killed as many as 40 million people. To put that in perspective, that could have been nearly 10% of the entire world's population at the time. This wasn't just chaos or mindless savagery. This was a deliberate, calculated strategy of conquest, a policy of terror so effective it could break the will of a nation before a single arrow flew. So how did Genghis Khan, an outcast from a minor tribe, manage to unite a scattered people and unleash them on the world? How did his ruthless tactics of annihilation literally reshape the course of human history? This isn't just a story about conquest. It's the story of how terror was forged into an instrument of empire, and how that empire, born in blood, paradoxically helped create the modern world. This is the story of the empire that brought the world to its knees. To understand the sheer, explosive violence of the Mongol conquests, you have to first picture the world they shattered. The early 13th century was a patchwork of powerful, ancient civilizations, each one confident it was the center of the universe. In the east, you had the Jin dynasty of China, ruling from their magnificent capital, Zhengdu, what we now call Beijing. They were a sophisticated, wealthy empire, protected by massive walls and a vast army, and they saw the nomads to their north as little more than primitive annoyances. To their west was the Khwarezmian Empire, a sprawling Muslim sultanate that controlled the arteries of the fabled Silk Road. Its cities, Samarkand, Bukhara, Urgench, were jewels of Islamic art, science, and commerce, wealthy beyond imagination. Further west, the principalities of the Kievan Rus were a collection of feuding states, a land of deep forests and fortified towns like Kiev, the glorious mother of Rus cities. And beyond them, the kingdoms of Europe, from Poland and Hungary to the Holy Roman Empire, were tangled in their own complex web of rivalries, mostly clueless about the storm gathering on the far horizon. Each of these realms saw themselves as permanent, protected by their armies, their walls, and their gods. They had no idea they were all living on borrowed time. They had no idea a man was rising on the desolate steppes who would burn their entire world. That man was born around 1162 with the name Temujin. Legend says he came into the world clutching a clot of blood in his hand, a sign, it was foretold, that he was destined for greatness. His early life, however, wasn't about destiny. It was about brutal, day-to-day survival. The Mongolian steppe was a merciless place, a chaotic landscape of warring nomadic tribes locked in a constant cycle of raids, kidnappings, and betrayals. When Temujin was just a boy, his father, a minor clan chieftain, was poisoned by a rival tribe. His own clan, seeing no use for a widow and her kids, abandoned them to die. Cast out and destitute, Temujin's family was forced to scavenge for roots and hunt small animals just to stay alive. Survival was the problem, and his solution showed the ruthlessness that would later define him. In a fight over a bird, he killed his own half-brother, making it brutally clear who was in charge within his desperate, starving family. As a young man, he was captured by the very clan that had abandoned him and was forced into a wooden collar like an animal. But he escaped, a feat that began building his reputation for being both tough and clever. His life was a relentless education in the harsh realities of power. He learned that loyalty was a resource more precious than gold, and that betrayal had to be answered with overwhelming force. In this brutal forge of poverty and violence, Temujin was hammered into the man who would become Genghis Khan. He wasn't just learning how to survive, he was learning how to conquer. Before he could conquer the world, Temujin first had to conquer his own people. The problem was that the Mongol tribes were a fractured, chaotic mess defined by bitter clan rivalries and endless blood feuds. His solution was to unify them by force, using a mix of brilliant political moves and terrifying brutality. He started by making alliances with powerful leaders like his childhood friend and blood brother Jamuka. Together they launched a daring raid to rescue Temujin's new wife, Berta, after she was kidnapped, an act that further cemented his reputation as a warrior to be reckoned with. But on the steppes, alliances were like sand. As Temujin's power grew, his friendship with Jamuka soured and exploded into open war. It was here that Temujin rolled out a revolutionary change to his army. Instead of organizing warriors by their clan, which always caused division, he created a strict decimal system, putting men into units of 10, 100, and 1,000. More importantly, he promoted commanders based on skill and loyalty, not their family name. This shattered the old tribal system and forged a new, unified army loyal only to him. His wars of unification were savage. When he defeated the Tatars, the tribe that had poisoned his father, he reportedly ordered the execution of every Tatar male taller than the linchpin of a cartwheel, a near-total act of vengeance. By 1206, after decades of brutal infighting, he had crushed all his rivals, including his one-time friend Jamuka. He now stood as the sole ruler of the Mongolian steppe. At a great assembly, a Kurultai, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. He had solved the problem of a divided people with a river of blood. But in doing so, he had created something new, a unified nomadic nation, a disciplined and battle-hardened army of horse archers, ready to spill out from the steppes and test its strength against the world. The new Khan first turned his gaze south toward the rich empires that bordered his nation. His first targets were the Western Shah and the mighty Jin dynasty in northern China. To these ancient, powerful civilizations, the Mongols were a recurring nuisance, barbarians on horseback to be paid off or occasionally slapped down. They fatally underestimated the hurricane that was about to break over them. The problem for the Mongols was that they were masters of open-field battle, but they knew next to nothing about taking a fortified city. The solution was simple: learn, and turn their enemies' strengths into weaknesses. In their campaigns, the Mongols systematically captured enemy engineers and forced them to build the siege weapons they needed: catapults, trebuchets, and battering rams. They quickly became masters of siegecraft, even learning to divert rivers to flood cities into submission. Their tactics were a blend of military genius and pure psychological terror. One of their most horrifying strategies was the Kharash, where they would round up captured civilians from a previous battle and drive them forward as human shields. This forced a city's defenders to either slaughter their own people or let the Mongol warriors advance untouched. Any city that dared to resist was made into a terrifying example. The message was simple: surrender or die. When the Jin emperor refused to submit, Genghis Khan unleashed his armies. The siege of the Jin capital, Zhongdu, was a nightmare that lasted for years. The city was so vast that the inhabitants eventually resorted to cannibalism. When it finally fell in 1215, the Mongols enacted a terrible revenge. The population was massacred, and the city was looted and burned. Contemporary chroniclers, known for their dramatic accounts, wrote that the streets were slick with human fat, and that for months the ground was white with bones. Some even described pyramids made from the skulls of the dead. The neighboring Western Shah kingdom was so utterly devastated that some historians argue it was the first recorded example of state-sponsored extermination, though the term genocide itself is a modern one. The gates of hell had opened, and the world was beginning to learn the price of defying the Khan.
This policy of systematic terror was just the beginning. The Mongol war machine was only getting warmed up. If you're finding this look into history's darker side compelling, take a second to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what happened when this wave of destruction rolled across all of Asia and into the heart of Europe. The conquest that would forever cement the Mongol reputation for apocalyptic violence started not with an invasion, but with a trade caravan. Genghis Khan, looking to open trade with the powerful Khwarezmian Empire to his west, sent a delegation of merchants and envoys. But in the city of Otrar, the local governor accused them of being spies, had them executed, and stole their goods. Trying to avoid a war, Genghis Khan sent a second diplomatic mission. The Shah of Khwarezmia responded by killing one of the envoys and shaving the beards of the other two, a profound and deliberate insult. That was the point of no return. For the Mongols, the murder of an ambassador was an unforgivable crime. It was a declaration of total war. The problem was a direct challenge to Mongol honor. The solution would be the complete and utter annihilation of an entire empire. In 1219, Genghis Khan unleashed the full might of his armies, possibly over 100,000 disciplined warriors, in a multi-pronged invasion. What followed was a campaign of extermination on a scale the world had never seen. The Shah's armies, though huge, were outmaneuvered and crushed. The Mongols swept through the empire, city by city, applying their brutal formula: surrender and be spared, resist and be erased. The legendary Silk Road cities, centers of learning and culture, were turned into slaughterhouses. In Bukhara, after the city fell, Genghis Khan himself rode his horse into the main mosque and announced that God had sent him as a punishment for the people's sins. The population was driven out onto the plains, artisans were rounded up for the Mongol war machine, and the rest were systematically massacred before the city was burned to the ground. Samarkand suffered a similar fate, but the worst was saved for Urgench, the capital. After a long siege, the Mongols were in no mood for mercy. They dammed the nearby river, and once the city fell, they unleashed the water, flooding the streets and drowning anyone who had survived the initial massacre. The Persian historian Juvaini wrote that each Mongol soldier was ordered to kill 24 people. At Nishapur, in retaliation for the death of Genghis Khan's son-in-law, chronicles claim that every living thing was slaughtered, right down to the cats and dogs, and that the skulls of men, women, and children were piled into separate massive pyramids. While these accounts are likely hyperbolic, designed to express unimaginable horror, there's no doubt the death toll was catastrophic, running into the millions. The Khwarezmian Empire wasn't just conquered, it was practically wiped from the map. With the heart of Asia under their boot, the Mongol storm turned west. Under Genghis Khan's brilliant general Subutai and his grandsons Batu Khan and Kadan, the Mongol army surged towards Europe. The problem for the Europeans was the same one that had doomed the Khwarezmians. They were divided, and they were totally unprepared for this new kind of war. European warfare, centered on heavily armored knights, was useless against the Mongols. The knights would charge, only to find the Mongol cavalry melting away before them, peppering them with arrows from powerful composite bows. Then, once their formations were broken, they'd be ambushed, encircled, and destroyed. Between 1237 and 1242, the Mongols unleashed a blitzkrieg across Eastern Europe. They first shattered the Kievan Rus. City after city fell: Ryazan, Vladimir, and in 1240, the great city of Kiev itself. A papal envoy who passed through a few years later described Kiev as a ghost town, with fewer than 200 houses left standing and its people reduced to slavery. The devastation set Russia's development back for generations. In the spring of 1241, the invasion hit its terrifying peak.
The Mongols attacked Poland and Hungary at the same time. On April 9th, they crushed a combined army of Poles, Germans, and Teutonic Knights at the Battle of Legnica. Just 2 days later, the main Mongol force under Batu and Subutai annihilated the Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohi, using their classic feigned retreat tactic to lure the Hungarians into a trap. In the apocalyptic invasion that followed, it's estimated that as much as half of Hungary's population may have perished from massacres, famine, and plague. The Mongol army swept through the Hungarian plains and raided into Austria and Dalmatia. It seemed like nothing could stop them from conquering all of Europe. And then, at the end of 1241, news arrived from Mongolia. The great Khan, Ögedei, was dead. Mongol tradition demanded that all princes of the royal line return to the capital to elect a successor. The armies turned back. Europe wasn't saved by an army or a king. It was saved by the unexpected death of one man thousands of miles away. The death of Genghis Khan in 1227 didn't slow the Mongol war machine down for long. His sons and grandsons were determined to finish his mission of world conquest. Their campaigns reached another horrifying peak in 1258 with the destruction of one of the world's greatest cities, Baghdad. For 500 years, Baghdad had been the heart of the Islamic world, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. It was a global center for science, medicine, and philosophy, home to the legendary House of Wisdom, a library that housed the collective knowledge of generations. The problem for the Caliph was that he had all this cultural prestige, but not much military power. When Hulagu Khan, another of Genghis's grandsons, demanded his surrender, the Caliph refused, fatally misjudging the man he was dealing with. Hulagu's response was swift and total. He assembled what may have been the largest Mongol army ever and laid siege to the city in January 1558. Within weeks, they'd breached the walls. The city surrendered on February 10th. What followed was a week of slaughter that sent a shockwave through the entire world. Contemporary accounts claim the number of dead was anywhere from 200,000 to over 1 million. The huge House of Wisdom and other libraries were destroyed. An enduring legend says so many books were thrown into the Tigris River that it ran black with ink and then red with the blood of the slaughtered scholars. Mosques, palaces, and hospitals were looted and burned. The Caliph himself was captured and, to avoid spilling royal blood on the earth, was wrapped in a carpet and trampled to death by horses. The sack of Baghdad wasn't just a military victory, it was a civilizational catastrophe, widely seen as the event that brought the Islamic Golden Age to a violent end. So how do we reconcile this mountain of skulls with what came next? For all the death and destruction, the Mongol Empire's legacy is two-sided. The dark side is undeniable. The slaughter of millions, the depopulation of huge regions of China, Persia, and Russia, the destruction of priceless cultural heritage, and the inadvertent spread of the Black Death, which traveled along the very trade routes the Mongols had made safe. But for all the death and destruction, there came a new era of unprecedented connection. The Pax Mongolica revitalized trade, spread world-changing technologies, and created a bridge between East and West. The Mongol conquests were a cataclysm so vast they may have even cooled the planet as forests grew back over abandoned farmlands, absorbing millions of tons of carbon from the atmosphere. So how do we reconcile this mountain of skulls with what came next? For all the death and destruction, the Mongol Empire's legacy is two-sided. The dark side is undeniable. The slaughter of millions, the depopulation of huge regions of China, Persia, and Russia, the destruction of priceless cultural heritage, and the inadvertent spread of the Black Death, which traveled along the very trade routes the Mongols had made safe. But for all the death and destruction, there came a new era of unprecedented connection. The Pax Mongolica revitalized trade, spread world-changing technologies, and created a bridge between East and West. The Mongol conquests were a cataclysm so vast they may have even cooled the planet as forests grew back over abandoned farmlands, absorbing millions of tons of carbon from the atmosphere. The story of the Mongols forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. Can progress be born from destruction? Was the stability and exchange of the Mongol peace worth the price of so many millions of lives? The answer remains buried in the ruins of Baghdad, Nishapur, and Kiev, a chilling reminder that the path of history is often paved with the bones of the forgotten. What part of the Mongol conquests do you find most shocking or fascinating? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's darkest and most complex chapters, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories that the history books often leave out.